So we were up and running, getting close to getting RF out of the exciter, which now with the bias supplies, we're getting a shorting problem with it, and we're popping fuses, and so we're right in the middle of debugging that right now. So Jules and Jim are up to their necks in kimchi looking into that one. I was going to get in there and help out, but I was systematically shooed by Jules, so I said, well, I'm going to do something else. So I'm in the process of actually putting together a block diagram of whole power supply system, because we have these interlocks, and this one feeds this one, and we don't have a good understanding yet of how this all plays. So right now it's been a lot of ham mode, like, well, let's try that. I don't know, hit the switch, what happens? Okay, so exactly. Does it do it that every time? How many fuses do we have? Anybody got a spare penny? So that's where we're in the middle of right now. So it sounds like a step backwards, which it is. However, this supply was up and running reliably up until about 2 months ago. So I mean, we still didn't have RF out of it, but so something happened. We had a cap short or something came out with it. We're in the middle of debugging that right now. Once that gets fixed and we're back on track again, I think we're going to be really close to getting, because right now we're just not getting the grid supplies up or the screen supplies up to the oscillator tube. And once that happens, I think it's going to be showtime. So. Cool. Yep.
Where's that located?
Building 120, the old Com Central transmitter room. You know where that is? On the right next to the museum in Building 120, right next to it. Big glass doors, shiny, looks really cool. Lots of stuff laying around. So if anybody wants to help, get a hold of Jim Jones, and we have a regularly scheduled work time on Wednesdays at noon, which coincides with when the museum is open for business.
Right.
And that's all. Next slide, that should be it, I think.
That's it. So any questions about all that or stuff? All right. So today I found somebody into taking the talk.
While we're waiting for the slides coming, has anyone looked at YouTube we record this every quarter. Has anybody actually watched it? Those of you who haven't made another meeting, looked in the newsletter for the links that take you to YouTube? Because if not, I'm just going to stop doing it.
How do you really feel, man?
You know what? We get like 1,000 hits on it.
Oh yeah?
None of, maybe 1 or 2 of our club members, but people around the world are watching our meeting.
Oh!
So I don't know if that's exciting or not, but...
Man, there are that many people who are bored enough they want to watch Charlie.
They're hams. Especially when you're working digital mode, you got to watch something while that thing is transmitting for a half
Maybe you're providing a service.
Charlie?
Yeah.
We had a question.
What's the question now?
Does anybody want to do love of the world? W0CXX, M0CXX?
We talked about that.
I was thinking that would be a good thing to have. I mean, if I put a wise up there, Rockwell State, it would be nice to have that. And also, I don't have it, and it would be nice to practice.
Well, we have something like 100 contacts from field day this last year. And apparently we have been getting requests online saying, where's your log? Where's your logbook? They're kind of surprised that we're not in the digital age. Volunteer. So,
Are you volunteering? Oh, wait, we just have a volunteer right here set up. N0CXX and W0CXX, logbook of the world.
But to Dave's point, so you know, we were getting full, so I thought, well, we'll be in the shack after tonight. 2 brand new paper logbooks from ARRL.
Man, I jumped back 50 years.
Provided I get into files.
What do you say?
ADIF.
ADIF.
Okay,
We can provide you the log files over field day.
okay, good.
That would be a start. But
Yeah.
the question is, that, okay, so before we go.
This is
forward,
forward,
we have-
and then backwards. And this is the laser pointer.
Oh, good,
if you wanna do that.
good, I do.
What logging program do we want to use? So the clubs have. Let's start that. Yes.
Right, it's not the newest version.
Does the Flex radio computer at main plant has N1MM on it?
Yeah, I don't see
It said someone put on, I don't know.
So,
I mean, we could go with the same thing we used during field day, if it costs something, it's not that expensive to put both stations with this, we should do the same thing in both of them.
right, what do you want to do?
Well, I guess the
Right now, we're using the
N1, NN plus.
Well, hold on, he has to show Swedish program, 65. I am.
All right, let's go.
All right, this thing's working? Yes. Okay, so most of us have lived through this period where we transitioned from vacuum tubes into Japanese radios, and for years I've wanted to go back and look and see what happened. Now, in Building 112, we have all these QST magazines all bundled together by year. So I took them and I started walking through them, and I found some interesting things that, Collins is in this, but of what happened and why it happened. So I thought you might enjoy the history of what happened to us.
Why did Drake die?
Yeah, what happened to Robert L. Drake and what happened? Johnson started Swan, and he lasted 6 years. Why? What happened to cause him to start and to go away? So I'll break it into three areas. I'll look at, come on laser pointer, at the technology, going through time and technology, and I'll note certain years and what was happening both in the foreign market and domestically, and I'll look at two areas. I'll look at the commercial radio volumes, which were enormous, 1,000 times bigger than amateur radio equipment, and that was indicative of what was coming and how the amateurs responded to commercial radios disappearing from American manufacturers. I'll look at what Japan did in the amateur market and commercial market, and then a review of what the American manufacturers did in response to seeing both the technologies changing and what Japan was doing at the time, all right? So let's start with technology. In 1953, everything was audio transistors. The few transistors that did a little bit of RF, that's a gain of 1, by the way, at 60 meg. It would just oscillate. Now this was a brilliant breakthrough. And the way it was made was by taking a little slim bar of silicon, and a man sat at a thing under a microscope. It was vertical. And he squirted nitric acid at both sides of the silicon bar, etching it away. A good man in 8 hours could make 100 transistors. And this was a big, hairy deal. The surface barrier transistor, you can see how it etched away here, right? They'd take that sucker down really narrow until they had the properties they wanted. And guy said that he could make 100 transistors in a good day, all right? Now, really shortly after this, those transistors showed up, 1955, and Philco made it, all right? Philco made the first all-transistor radio way back in 1955, and they had to have a half a meg above 0.6, so they're running at 2 megahertz. Of course, that's trivial for tubes at this point, but for transistors, that's what we had in 1955. Okay, Philco got a
The
contract.
option with that was the car radio that had the vibrator in it. And you young guys don't know what a vibrator is.
Yeah. Okay, 2 years after this came out, Philco got a contract to make a computer with these surface barrier transistors. Now, the whole life of the surface barrier transistor, it died, all right? In 1960, it was completely obsolete. So it came, it did its thing, and in 7 years, it was gone. All right, let's go to 1954. And you that remember, you've got to remember the Cornell ads. They sold 3 tubes for $1. And sometimes it was two tubes for $1, depending on what they were. But the received tubes from Cornell were just cheap, 33 cents, all right? This is 10 years later. I couldn't find a 1953 magazine article, but you can see that they range from $1, $2 to $5 or something like that, receiving tubes. So they were cheap. If you bought them in bulk, you could get them very inexpensively. Drake bought its finals were TV sweep tubes in R.L. Drake's equipment. And he had a deal directly with Sylvania to manufacture them, and he got them for $2, the finals. Okay, so let's look at next year, 1954. In 1954, what we had, look at this. Remember the two prices I just showed you? This is for one transistor. One transistor. I personally knew a guy when I worked at Boeing Military Airplane Company in Seattle 39 years ago, that he traded, just a few years later, about 1960, he traded a complete Collins S line for 100 RF transistors. And he got a really good deal. He was elated with that. And I started working with him in '77. So those prices were just enormous, just enormous. So now you could, in 1954, get audio transistors. They were making hearing aids. That's what really pushed the transistor development back then. Tiny transistors in hearing aids. And it was RCA. RCA dominated this market back then. So here's 1955. We've come up another year. And this was the transoceanic was a big deal. It was a radio that was always there, been there for years. Yeah, you're nodding. It's a beautiful radio. It went on expeditions. That was their whole gig is, you know, it's portable. You can run it on batteries. And it's vacuum tubes for many years. Now, if you look at these, you have, so you have 2, 3, 4, 5, the standard 5-tube lineup. And this is a pentagrid converter. Everything else is about a 50-cent tube, 30-cent tube, something like that in that point. But they ran. They were very, very dependable, and they sold tubes up until 1962. I'll come back to that in a bit. Audio transistors, look at the year. These are forerunners, these two here are forerunners to the 3055, and this is back in 1956. So they had this down pat. They had audio down really well, and it was all germanium, all germanium. RCA dominated all this stuff in the early years, and let's see. So note this, after 1956, with these inexpensive and high-powered audio transistors, the audio functions could have been transistorized. They could have slowly begun to merge this stuff in. And what happened is in 1956, the Japan, let me jump to it. We'll get to 1957. Okay, look at what they cost. This is a vacuum tube radio in 1956. And that's the price. This is major money. This is major money to buy a tube radio in 1956 when you're making 75 cents per hour. So it was a huge deal. But that's what the market was doing, and some people, were buying these products. 1957, Zenith came out. This is the first transoceanic, the very first portable that was all transistor. And it cost $2,000 in today's money, $2,200. But now look at this. The same year, remember they made transoceanics in tubes until 1962. So this thing here was $275, and the tube version was almost half. Okay. Now think about that. What's different? What are they buying? They're buying no difference in functionality, none at all. There's no difference in functionality between the two. But what they did buy is they bought, why did I highlight that? It was battery life and weight. Battery life and weight was worth twice the price in 1957. So the markets were changing, they were merging. Tubes were dropping down, transistors were coming up. Now, in 1958, guess what we have? We have a 90 meg transistor. It's got a gain of 1 at 200 meg. So it just barely oscillates. It would, you know, their advertisement was it'll oscillate at 200 meg. So that's pretty good. No, I'm sorry, that's not right. It's 90 meg, isn't it? Am I getting my stuff wrong? No. Maximum frequency is 90 megahertz. Alpha cutoff. All right. Okay, so
Switched to the diffused.
right, they went to a diffused base and dropped all that surface barrier stuff. So that's 58. In 59, this is a beautiful part. It was entirely robotically built. It's the epitome, it's the peak of vacuum tubes, and there was nothing on the market. No transistor could compete with this noise and frequency performance. Nobody could. And a Japanese American named Isaki came up with tunnel diodes this in 1958. And a tunnel diode has the noise figure of a maser. It's incredible. Only a tunnel diode was better than a transistor. In fact, tunnel diodes are still better than transistors for noise figure. But the trouble is, in 1959, the same year that the new Vista came out, this came out. So the new Vista was instantly obsoleted, but nobody used it. But this is what we had available. We had available a 750 megahertz part that do over 1/2 a watt. So when you come down here with, it doesn't say it. It has a useful gain of about 10 at all the amateur frequencies. So at this point, you could have done the whole RF lineup. Come on, let's go back here. There it is. 10 dB of gain at 100 megahertz. So you could make an IF at 100 megahertz with that transistor. So all of the HF transceivers, and I'll mostly talk just about HF in this presentation, could have been built starting in 1959. All the RF parts could have been built, and you could have had a transceiver with a driver and 2 finals. So you could have built basically the Kenwood 820 in 1959. It could have been done, and it would have been technology pushing. Now, they weren't cheap yet, okay? So let's look at 1960, the next year. Here's another transoceanic, the Royal 2000, and it was $189. Remember, it was $225 2 years before. And the price went from $225 to that to $150. It's hand wired. Remember the Zenith ads? The quality goes in before the name goes on, hand wired. But look at this. So the transistors have existed for about 3 years. And what's happening?